Picture a nation on edge, its people looking to their leaders for protection, for guidance, for the promise of safety in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. Now imagine those same leaders, in the shadowed corridors of power, drafting a plan not to shield their citizens, but to sacrifice them. A plan so cold, so calculated, that it would turn ordinary Americans, mothers, fathers, workers, dreamers, into unwitting pawns in a deadly game of geopolitical chess. A dystopian novel or a fevered conspiracy theory spun in the dark corners of the internet. This is Operation Northwoods, a real documented proposal from 1962, crafted at the highest levels of the United States military. It was a scheme to stage terrorist attacks on American soil, to spill the blood of innocent civilians, and to pin the blame on Cuba, all to ignite a war that would serve the strategic aims of a nation gripped by Cold War paranoia. Welcome to Secrets Unleashed, where we rip away the veil of history to expose the truths that linger in the shadows. This is the story of a conspiracy not born of fiction, but buried in declassified documents. A tale that forces us to confront a chilling question. How far would those entrusted with power go to achieve their ends? And what does it mean when the guardians of a nation consider betrayal not just a tactic, but a strategy? The year was 1962, and the world was a tinderbox. The Cold War had cast a long, dark shadow over the globe, pitting the United States against the Soviet Union in a battle not just of military might, but of ideologies, wills, and fears. Every move was scrutinized, every gesture magnified, as both superpowers jostled for dominance. In the midst of this tension, Cuba emerged as a flashpoint, a small island nation just 90 miles from Florida, now a Soviet ally under Fidel Castro's defiant rule. To the American military, Cuba wasn't just a neighbor. It was a dagger pointed at the heart of the United States, a communist foothold in the Western Hemisphere that could not be tolerated. The Bay of Pigs invasion, a botched CIA operation in 1961, had left the Kennedy administration humiliated, its credibility battered, and the Pentagon desperate for a decisive response. The stage was set for a plan so audacious, so morally fraught, that it would challenge the very principles America claimed to uphold. Operation Northwoods was born in the war rooms of the Pentagon, under the watchful eye of General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Lemnitzer was no rogue actor. He was a decorated soldier, a man who had helped plan the D-Day invasion and navigated the brutal realities of global conflict. To him, and to his colleagues like General Curtis LeMay, the stakes could not have been higher. Communism was not an abstract threat. It was a specter that haunted their every decision, a force they believed could unravel the fabric of the free world. In their minds, the ends justified the means, even if those means included unthinkable acts. The Northwoods Memorandum, formally titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, was their answer. A chilling blueprint for deception on a scale that defies comprehension. What did this plan entail? Picture this. A commercial airliner, filled with passengers, men and women heading to work, families on vacation, suddenly shot down over international waters, the wreckage scattered across the sea. The headlines would scream of Cuban aggression, of a ruthless attack on innocent Americans. But the truth? The plane might have been empty, a drone disguised as a civilian flight, or worse, the passenger list fabricated to mask the reality of a staged disaster. Or imagine a bustling American city, Miami perhaps, or Washington, D.C., shaken by explosions, storefronts shattered, streets stained with the aftermath of a bombing. The public would demand retribution, their grief and anger a rallying cry for war. Yet the perpetrators would not be Cuban operatives, but American operatives acting under orders to sow chaos and point the finger at Castro. The plan even proposed sinking a U.S. Navy ship, evoking memories of the USS Maine, whose destruction in 1898 sparked the Spanish-American War. Cuban refugees fleeing oppression could be targeted. Boats sunk, lives lost, all to paint Cuba as a merciless aggressor. These were not idle musings. They were detailed proposals, meticulously crafted, approved by the Joint Chiefs, and sent up the chain to the Secretary of Defense and, ultimately, to President John F. Kennedy. The audacity of Operation Northwoods lies not just in its scope, but in its cold pragmatism. The men who devised it weren't driven by personal vendettas or greed. They were patriots, convinced that the survival of their nation demanded extraordinary measures. They saw the American public not as individuals with lives and dreams, but as a collective force to be mobilized, their outrage a weapon to be wielded. The plan's architects understood the power of narrative, how a single, shocking event could sway a nation, how grief could be molded into resolve. They drew inspiration from history, from incidents like Pearl Harbor, which had unified a divided America. But unlike Pearl Harbor, these attacks would be orchestrated, the bloodshed by design, the enemy a fiction created to serve a greater purpose. Yet even in the face of such a plan, there was hope. President Kennedy, a man navigating the treacherous waters of his presidency, stood as the final barrier. At 44, he was young, charismatic, and burdened by the weight of a nation's expectations. The Bay of Pigs had taught him the perils of unchecked covert operations, and his moral compass, honed by a belief in progress and humanity, recoiled at the thought of sacrificing American lives for a manufactured cause. When the Northwoods Memorandum reached his desk, Kennedy rejected it outright. A decision that may have saved countless lives but deepened the rift with his military advisors. His refusal was a testament to the power of conscience, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one person's resolve can alter the course of history. Why does this matter today? Because Operation Northwoods, buried for decades until its declassification in 1997, forces us to question the foundations of trust. The documents, released as part of the JFK Assassination Records Review Board, are not rumors or speculation. They are proof of a government willing to consider betrayal as a tool. They challenge us to ask, what other secrets remain hidden? How often have the lines between protector and predator blurred? On platforms like X, voices still debate Northwoods, some seeing it as evidence of a deep state capable of orchestrating modern tragedies, though such claims remain unproven. For true crime and history fans, this is more than a footnote. It's a window into the ethics of power, the cost of secrecy, and the fragility of the bond between a government and its people. Secrets Unleashed exists to uncover these truths, to give voice to the stories that shape our world. Operation Northwoods is a stark reminder that power, unchecked, can lead to plans that betray the very values they claim to defend. As we pull back the curtain on this chilling chapter, we invite you to join us, to question, to probe, to demand transparency. What does it mean when those sworn to protect us consider turning against us? How do we reconcile patriotism with the willingness to sacrifice the innocent? These are the questions that linger, the shadows that stretch across decades, urging us to stay vigilant, to seek the truth, and to never forget the cost of secrets kept in the name of security. Welcome to Secrets Unleashed, the YouTube channel where every week we rip away the veil of history to reveal the truths that fester in its darkest corners. Here we don't just recount events, we unearth the human stories woven into them, the ambitions that drive the powerful, the courage of those who stand against them, and the silent suffering of those caught in the crossfire. I'm your narrator, your guide through the labyrinth of secrets, leading you not with sensationalism, but with a steady hand, a skeptical eye, and a commitment to uncovering the moral complexities that define our past. Today, we plunge into one of the most disturbing chapters in American history. Operation Northwoods, a 1962 proposal crafted by the U.S. Department of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This was no mere thought experiment. It was a meticulously detailed plan to stage false flag attacks on American soil, to orchestrate acts of terror that would kill innocent civilians, and to frame Cuba as the culprit, all to justify a military invasion. This is not the stuff of serial killers or courtroom battles, but a slow-burning, character-driven saga that exposes the ethical quicksand of secrecy, the cost of unchecked ambition, and the fragile line between security and sacrifice. For true crime and history fans, this is a story that demands your attention, not just for its audacity, but for what it reveals about power, deception, and the human cost of decisions made in the shadows. Our approach today draws inspiration from two pivotal exposés: Operation Greylord, the 1980s FBI sting that uncovered rampant corruption in Chicago's judicial system, and the SL-1 nuclear disaster, a 1961 tragedy that revealed the dangers of hubris and secrecy in America's nuclear ambitions. Like Greylord, we'll focus on the human stories behind Operation Northwoods, the planners who believed they were saving the nation, the lone voice who stopped them, and the ordinary Americans who might have paid the ultimate price. Like the SL-1 expose, we'll adopt a skeptical lens, questioning the official narrative and probing the moral compromises that underpin such schemes. This isn't a tale of gore or graphic violence. We'll steer clear of sensational details, focusing instead on the motivations, the dilemmas, and the quiet moments of conscience that shape this dark chapter. Our tone is theatrical yet grounded, dramatic yet reflective, designed to pull you into the minds of those who lived this story while urging you to question the systems they served. Operation Northwoods emerged at a time when the world seemed poised on the edge of a knife. It was 1962, and the Cold War had cast a pall over global affairs, turning every political maneuver into a potential spark for catastrophe. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a high-stakes duel, each side fearing the other's ideology would engulf the world. Cuba, under Fidel Castro's revolutionary leadership, had become a lightning rod for American anxieties. Just 90 miles from Florida, this small island nation had aligned itself with the Soviet Union, transforming it into a perceived threat, a communist outpost in America's backyard. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion of 1961, a CIA-orchestrated attempt to overthrow Castro, had left the Kennedy administration humiliated and the military establishment itching for redemption. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which would bring the world to the brink of nuclear war later that year, was still months away, but the tension was already suffocating. Every decision, every plan, was colored by the specter of communism and the fear that one misstep could tip the balance toward annihilation. Into this crucible of paranoia and ambition stepped the Joint Chiefs of Staff, led by General Lyman Lemnitzer, a career soldier whose worldview was forged in the fires of World War II and the Korean War. Lemnitzer and his colleagues, men like General Curtis LeMay, a firebrand known for his aggressive tactics, were not cartoonish villains. They were patriots, driven by a conviction that the spread of communism posed an existential threat to the United States. Their proposal, outlined in a March 13, 1962, memorandum titled "Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba," was a product of this mindset. It suggested staging a series of false flag operations, acts of violence designed to look like Cuban attacks, but executed by American forces. The goal? To inflame public opinion, to turn grief and outrage into a mandate for war. The plans included shooting down commercial airliners, bombing American cities, sinking U.S. Navy ships, and even targeting Cuban refugees, all carefully staged to pin the blame on Castro's regime. These were not idle fantasies. They were detailed, actionable proposals approved by the highest military authorities and sent to Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara and, ultimately, to President John F. Kennedy. What makes Operation Northwoods so compelling and so disturbing is not just the audacity of the plan, but the human stories behind it. This is where our Greylord-inspired approach comes into play. Operation Greylord, which exposed judges and lawyers taking bribes in Chicago's courts, wasn't just about corruption. It was about the individuals who justified their actions, those who fought to expose them, and the citizens betrayed by a system meant to protect them. Similarly, Northwoods is a story of people. The military leaders who saw deception as a necessary evil, the president who drew a moral line, and the countless Americans who might have become victims of a manufactured tragedy. We'll meet General Lemnitzer, whose strategic brilliance was matched by a willingness to cross ethical boundaries. Robert McNamara, the enigmatic defense secretary caught between loyalty to Kennedy and pressure from the military, and Kennedy himself, a young leader whose rejection of the plan may have defined his presidency. We'll also consider the unseen figures, the civilians who could have died in a staged bombing, the sailors on a doomed ship, the refugees whose suffering might have been exploited, all to serve a narrative of war. Our skeptical lens, inspired by the SL-1 disaster, pushes us to question the official narrative. The SL-1 explosion, which killed 3 workers at a nuclear reactor in Idaho, was initially downplayed by authorities, only for later investigations to reveal negligence and hubris. Similarly, Operation Northwoods was buried for decades, its existence only confirmed when declassified in 1997 by the JFK Assassination Records Review Board. The revelation, brought to light by journalist James Bamford in his book Body of Secrets, sparked debates about government secrecy and the potential for false flag operations. On platforms like X, users have pointed to Northwoods as evidence of a government capable of orchestrating attacks to manipulate public opinion, though such claims often veer into unproven speculation. Our task is not to fuel conspiracy theories, but to examine the documented facts with a critical eye, asking, what drove these men to propose such a plan? How close did it come to reality? And what does its existence say about the balance between security and morality? For true crime and history fans, Operation Northwoods is more than a historical footnote. It's a mirror held up to the complexities of power. Like Greylord, it reveals how institutions can betray the public trust, not through malice, but through a warped sense of duty. Like SL-1, it exposes the dangers of secrecy, where decisions made behind closed doors can have catastrophic consequences. This story is a slow burn, not because it lacks drama, but because its power lies in the quiet moments, the deliberations in smoke-filled rooms, the weight of Kennedy's decision, the unspoken fears of a nation unaware of the plans being made in its name. We'll avoid graphic details, focusing instead on the ethical dilemmas, the clash of loyalties, and the human cost of ambition. This is a tale of deception, but also of redemption, of a plan conceived in darkness, but stopped by a single act of conscience. As we embark on this journey, we invite you to join us at Secrets Unleashed, where our weekly uploads uncover the stories that history tried to bury. Operation Northwoods is a testament to the power of truth, a reminder that even the most shocking secrets can come to light. It challenges us to question the narratives we're fed, to demand transparency from those in power, and to remember that the line between protector and predator is thinner than we'd like to believe. Whether you're a true crime aficionado, drawn to the intrigue of covert operations, or a history buff fascinated by the Cold War's moral complexities, this story will grip you, unsettle you, and leave you pondering the cost of secrecy. So, settle in, keep your skepticism sharp, and let's peel back the layers of Operation Northwoods, a a story of power, betrayal, and the fragile hope of accountability. To grasp the chilling audacity of Operation Northwoods, we must transport ourselves to 1962, a year when the world seemed to hold its breath, perched on the precipice of annihilation. The Cold War was no mere diplomatic standoff. It was a psychological crucible, a relentless forge of paranoia, desperation, and ideological fervor that shaped every decision, every whisper in the halls of power. The United States and the Soviet Union were not just rivals. They were existential adversaries, locked in a battle not only for global dominance, but for the very soul of the world's future. Each side saw the other as a harbinger of doom. Capitalism versus communism, freedom versus tyranny, progress versus oppression. Every move was scrutinized, every gesture magnified, as the specter of nuclear war loomed like a storm cloud over the globe. In this tense, unforgiving landscape, Cuba emerged as a flashpoint, a small island nation, just 90 miles from Florida's shores, transformed into a geopolitical powder keg. Fidel Castro's rise to power in 1959, his defiant alignment with the Soviet Union, and the catastrophic failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 had left the US government humiliated, its confidence shaken, and its resolve hardened to neutralize what it saw as a communist dagger pointed at America's heart. The Cuban Missile Crisis, which would push humanity to the brink of nuclear catastrophe later in 1962, was still months away, but the tension was already a living thing, palpable in every briefing room, every intelligence report, every anxious glance toward the horizon. The United States in 1962 was a nation grappling with its identity and its place in a rapidly changing world. The post-World War II era had thrust America into the role of global superpower, but with that mantle came burdens, expectations of strength, moral clarity, and unwavering resolve. The Soviet Union's growing influence, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, was seen as a direct challenge to American hegemony. Cuba, once a playground for American tourists and businesses, had become a symbol of defiance under Castro. His revolution, which overthrew the US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista, was not just a political upheaval, it was a slap in the face to American influence. By 1961, Castro's embrace of Soviet aid, military, economic, and ideological, had transformed Cuba into a Soviet satellite, or so it seemed to Washington. The Bay of Pigs, a CIA-orchestrated attempt to topple Castro using Cuban exiles, was a disaster. The invasion failed spectacularly, exposing American involvement and leaving President John F. Kennedy's young administration reeling. The public, already wary of communism's spread, demanded action. The military, humiliated by the fiasco, burned for redemption. And the intelligence community, stung by its own miscalculations, doubled down on covert schemes to destabilize Castro's regime. This was the crucible into which Operation Northwoods was born, a plan so shocking that it forces us to confront the moral boundaries of power. To understand its origins, we must first meet the men who shaped it, not as caricatures of villainy, but as complex figures driven by a mix of duty, fear, and conviction. At the heart of the military establishment stood General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Lemnitzer was no rogue operator. He was a decorated veteran, a West Point graduate who had helped plan the D-Day invasion and navigated the brutal realities of the Korean War. At 62, he was a man of his time, shaped by the unforgiving arithmetic of global conflict. To Lemnitzer, the Cold War was not an abstract struggle. It was a fight for survival, where the spread of communism threatened to unravel the free world. He saw Cuba not as a distant island, but as a Soviet foothold, a staging ground for subversion that could destabilize the entire Western Hemisphere. His worldview was shared by his colleagues, men like General Curtis LeMay, the hawkish Chief of Staff of the Air Force, whose aggressive tactics during World War II had earned him both admiration and infamy. LeMay, known for his blunt demeanor and unrelenting pursuit of victory, believed in decisive action. Diplomacy was secondary to strength. These were not men plotting for personal gain or sadistic pleasure. They were patriots, convinced that their actions, however extreme, served a greater good. Yet their vision of security, forged in the fires of war and paranoia, led them to a plan that would shock the conscience of any who learned of it. The political climate of 1962 was equally fraught, a tangle of competing pressures and fragile alliances. President John F. Kennedy, at 44, was a figure of charisma and promise, but also a leader under siege. Elected on a platform of hope and progress, he faced a nation anxious about its future. The Cold War had seeped into everyday life. School children practiced duck and cover drills, families built fallout shelters, and the nightly news carried updates on Soviet advances. Kennedy's administration was caught in a delicate balancing act. On one hand, he faced a military establishment eager for bold, decisive action against Cuba. The Joint Chiefs, emboldened by their Cold War mandate, saw military intervention as the ultimate solution to the Cuban problem. On the other hand, Kennedy grappled with a public wary of communism, but weary of war, and a personal skepticism about the efficacy of covert operations, sharpened by the Bay of Pigs debacle. The failure of that invasion had not only embarrassed the US, but also deepened Kennedy's distrust of his intelligence and military advisors. He was a man walking a tightrope, trying to project strength without plunging the world into chaos. The CIA, still licking its wounds from the Bay of Pigs, was another key player in this drama. The agency had a long history of covert operations, overthrowing governments in Iran and Guatemala, orchestrating propaganda campaigns, and running espionage networks. In Cuba, the CIA saw a chance to redeem itself. Its leaders pushed for aggressive measures, sabotage, assassination attempts, and psychological warfare to weaken Castro's grip. Operations like Mongoose, a covert program to destabilize Cuba, were already underway, involving everything from poisoned cigars to plans for sparking an internal rebellion. But the CIA's failures had made it cautious, and its proposals often lacked the military muscle the Pentagon craved. The Joint Chiefs, by contrast, saw covert operations as a prelude to invasion, a way to pave the path for tanks and troops. This tension between the CIA's shadowy schemes and the military's blunt force created a fertile ground for a plan like Northwoods, which married the deception of intelligence work with the scale of military ambition. The broader context of 1962 also shaped the mindset behind Operation Northwoods. The Cold War was not just a clash of superpowers, it was a battle of narratives. Both the US and the Soviet Union understood the power of public opinion, not just at home but across the globe. In Latin America, where Castro's revolution had inspired leftist movements, the US feared losing influence. The Alliance for Progress, Kennedy's initiative to counter communism with economic aid, was struggling to compete with Castro's fiery rhetoric. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was bolstering its presence, sending advisors and weapons to Cuba, raising fears of a missile base just minutes from American shores. The US needed a way to rally its people, to justify action against Cuba that would not only topple Castro, but also send a message to the world. America would not tolerate communism in its sphere. This was the cauldron of fear, ambition, and desperation that gave birth to Operation Northwoods. The plan was not the work of a lone zealot, but a collective effort by the Joint Chiefs, reflecting a military culture that saw deception as a legitimate tool of statecraft. The memorandum, dated March 13, 1962, was a product of its time, a time when the stakes felt apocalyptic, when the line between right and wrong blurred under the weight of survival. It proposed staging attacks that would mimic Cuban aggression, from bombing American cities to sinking US ships, all designed to provoke outrage and justify war. The planners drew inspiration from history, incidents like the sinking of the USS Maine in 1898, which had spurred the Spanish-American War, but their vision was darker, more calculated, willing to sacrifice American lives to achieve their ends. As we delve into this story, we must hold on to the human element, the fears that drove Lemnitzer and his colleagues, the pressures that tested Kennedy's resolve, the unseen civilians who might have borne the cost. This is not just a tale of a plan, but of a moment when the guardians of a nation considered turning against their own, all in the name of security. The Cold War's shadow loomed large, but it was the choices of individuals, flawed, driven, and human, that shaped this dark chapter. As we move forward, we'll explore how Operation Northwoods unfolded, who stood to gain, who stood to lose, and what it reveals about the fragile trust between a government and its people. The story of Operation Northwoods unfolds in the smoke-filled war rooms of the Pentagon, where the weight of the Cold War pressed heavily on the shoulders of the nation's military elite. It was early 1962, a time when the world seemed to teeter on the edge of catastrophe, and the United States was grappling with a perceived existential threat just 90 miles from its shores. Under the leadership of General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a group of the nation's most senior military minds crafted a series of proposals that would come to be known as Operation Northwoods. These were not idle brainstorming sessions or theoretical musings. They were meticulously detailed, actionable plans, laid out in a chilling memorandum titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, dated March 13, 1962. Declassified in 1997, this document stands as a stark artifact of a mindset willing to cross moral boundaries in pursuit of strategic advantage. For true crime and history fans tuning into Secrets Unleashed, this narrative is a slow-burning exploration of ambition, loyalty, and the ethical quagmire of a plan that proposed sacrificing American lives to provoke a war. The audacity of Operation Northwoods lies in its cold, calculated precision. The Joint Chiefs, under Lemnitzer's direction, proposed a series of false flag operations, acts of terrorism designed to appear as Cuban aggression, but orchestrated by the U.S. government itself. These were not vague ideas, but specific scenarios, each crafted to manipulate public opinion and create a casus belli for invading Cuba. The proposals included hijacking or shooting down commercial airliners. The planners suggested staging the destruction of a civilian plane, potentially using a drone disguised as a passenger flight or faking passenger lists to obscure the truth. The wreckage, scattered across international waters, would be blamed on Cuban forces, igniting public fury, sinking a U.S. Navy ship, evoking the 1898 sinking of the USS Maine, which had spurred the Spanish-American War. The Joint Chiefs proposed destroying a Navy vessel in Cuban waters, framing it as an unprovoked attack by Castro's regime, orchestrating attacks on American cities. The plan outlined bombings or shootings in cities like Miami or Washington, D.C., designed to kill civilians and sow chaos. The carnage would be attributed to Cuban operatives, rallying Americans behind a call for war, targeting Cuban refugees. The memorandum suggested staging attacks on refugees fleeing Castro's regime, sinking boats, bombing settlements, or fabricating evidence of Cuban aggression, such as burning crops, or staging assaults on U.S. bases like Guantanamo Bay, using fake Cuban aircraft. The planners proposed using U.S. planes painted to resemble Cuban aircraft to harass or shoot down American drones, creating the illusion of unprovoked hostility. Each scenario was a masterclass in deception, designed to exploit the emotional power of tragedy. The Joint Chiefs understood a fundamental truth. Public outrage could be a weapon, a force to galvanize a nation. They drew inspiration from history. Incidents like Pearl Harbor, which had unified a divided America in 1941, or the USS Maine, whose destruction had propelled the US into war with Spain. But unlike those events, the attacks proposed in Northwoods would be manufactured, with American lives as deliberate collateral damage. The planners saw the public not as individuals with dreams and families, but as a collective force to be mobilized, their grief a tool to justify invasion. This was not the work of a rogue faction or a lone zealot. The memorandum bore the approval of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the pinnacle of U.S. military authority, representing the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Lemnitzer, a decorated World War II veteran, was joined by figures like General Curtis LeMay, whose aggressive stance had shaped U.S. strategy in the Pacific Theater. These men were not driven by personal gain or malice. They were patriots, shaped by a Cold War mindset that saw communism as an existential threat. To them, Cuba was not just an island. It was a Soviet dagger aimed at America's heart, a foothold that could destabilize the Western Hemisphere. Their plan was born of desperation, a belief that extraordinary measures were justified to protect the nation. Yet the moral cost was staggering. To save America, they were willing to betray its people, to stage atrocities that would leave blood on American streets. The memorandum made its way up the chain of command, landing on the desk of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, a former auto executive turned defense strategist. McNamara was a brilliant but enigmatic figure, known for his analytical mind and data-driven approach. He was no dove. His tenure would later be defined by his role in escalating the Vietnam War, but he operated under President Kennedy's directive to avoid reckless confrontation. McNamara's response to Northwoods is shrouded in ambiguity. He forwarded the proposal to Kennedy, but did not publicly endorse it, his silence a reflection of the tension between his loyalty to the president and the pressure from a hawkish military establishment. McNamara was a man caught between worlds, a technocrat navigating a culture of warriors, and his role in this story underscores the complexity of power in a time of crisis. The pivotal moment came when the Northwoods Memorandum reached President John F. Kennedy. At 44, Kennedy was a leader under siege, balancing a military eager for action, a public wary of communism, and his own moral compass. The Bay of Pigs invasion, a catastrophic failure just a year earlier, had left him deeply skeptical of covert operations and the advisors who championed them. When he read the Northwoods proposal, his reaction was swift and unequivocal. He rejected it outright. The reasons for his decision are debated among historians. Some point to the moral implications. A president who campaigned on hope and progress could not stomach a plan that treated American lives as expendable. Others suggest his experience with the Bay of Pigs had made him wary of schemes that relied on deception, fearing they could backfire and escalate tensions with the Soviet Union. Whatever the motivation, Kennedy's refusal was more than a policy decision. It was a stand against a military culture that saw manipulation and sacrifice as legitimate tools of statecraft. His rejection drew a line in the sand, asserting that there were limits to what America would do, even in the name of security. Kennedy's decision did not erase the plan's existence, nor did it silence the mindset that birthed it. The Joint Chiefs, frustrated by what they saw as weakness, continued to push for aggressive action against Cuba. Lemnitzer, in particular, faced consequences. Later that year, he was reassigned to NATO, a move some interpreted as a quiet rebuke. But the story of Operation Northwoods might have remained buried, a forgotten footnote in the Cold War, if not for its declassification in 1997. The release of the documents, prompted by the Assassination Records Review Board investigating Kennedy's death, brought this chilling plan into the public eye. Journalist James Bamford, in his book Body of Secrets 2001, played a key role in exposing Northwoods, drawing on the declassified memorandum to reveal its details. Bamford, a former naval intelligence officer, approached the story with a researcher's rigor, not a conspiracy theorist's zeal, making the revelation all the more credible. The declassification sparked a firestorm of debate, particularly among those skeptical of official narratives. On platforms like X, Northwoods has been cited as evidence of the government's willingness to stage false flag operations, with some drawing parallels to events like the 9/11 attacks. These claims remain speculative, lacking concrete evidence, but they reflect a broader erosion of trust. The revelation of Northwoods fueled questions about the ethics of secrecy, the lengths to which governments might go to manipulate public perception, and the fragility of the bond between a nation and its leaders. For true crime and history fans, the story resonates like Operation Greylord, which exposed corruption in Chicago's courts, or the SL-1 nuclear disaster, which revealed the dangers of hubris. Northwoods is a case study in power's temptations, showing how far those in authority might go when fear and ambition cloud their judgment. The legacy of Operation Northwoods lies in its unanswered questions. How close did it come to being implemented? Were similar plans proposed in other contexts, still hidden in classified archives? And what does it say about a government that could conceive of such a scheme, even if it was never executed? Kennedy's rejection was a victory for conscience, a moment when one man's moral clarity halted a descent into ethical abyss. Yet the plan's very existence is a warning, a reminder that power, unchecked, can lead to betrayal. As we explore this story on Secrets Unleashed, we're not just recounting events. We're probing the human cost of decisions made in the shadows, the clash between duty and morality, and the enduring need for vigilance in a democracy. Operation Northwoods never came to pass, but its shadow lingers, urging us to question, to demand transparency, and to hold those in power accountable for the secrets they keep. To truly understand Operation Northwoods, we must pause the narrative of plans and memoranda to meet the people at its heart, not just the architects who conceived this audacious scheme, but those who stood to suffer its consequences, and the one man whose moral conviction halted it. This is not a story of faceless institutions, but of individuals, men shaped by their times, driven by conviction or caution, and ordinary citizens who, unknowingly, could have become pawns in a deadly game. For the true crime and history fans of Secrets Unleashed, this character-driven exploration, inspired by the slow-burning human focus of Operation Greylord and the skeptical lens of the SL-1 disaster, brings to life the ambitions, dilemmas, and humanity behind one of the Cold War's darkest proposals. Here, we meet General Lyman Lemnitzer, the patriot whose calculus crossed ethical lines, Robert McNamara, the technocrat torn between duty and doubt, John F. Kennedy, the president who drew a moral line, the unnamed Americans who might have paid the ultimate price, and James Bamford, the journalist who brought the truth to light. Their stories reveal the fragile interplay of power, conscience, and secrecy that defines Operation Northwoods. General Lyman Lemnitzer, the strategist's blind spot. At 62, General Lyman Lemnitzer was the embodiment of military discipline, a West Point graduate whose career spanned the defining conflicts of the 20th century. Born in 1899, he had risen through the ranks with a resume that included planning the D-Day invasion and serving in the Korean War. By 1962, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Lemnitzer was a towering figure, respected for his strategic brilliance and unyielding commitment to national security. He was not a madman or a cartoonish villain. He was a product of his era, forged in a world where global wars and ideological battles demanded ruthless pragmatism. To Lemnitzer, the Cold War was not a distant chess game, but a visceral struggle for survival. Cuba, under Fidel Castro's Soviet-aligned regime, was no mere island. It was a dagger aimed at America's heart, a communist foothold just 90 miles from Florida. The failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 had only deepened his conviction that decisive action was needed to neutralize this threat before it grew into a broader Soviet incursion. Lemnitzer's support for Operation Northwoods was not born of malice, but of a cold, calculated logic. The loss of a few lives, however tragic, was a price worth paying to protect the nation from a greater evil. The memorandum he endorsed proposed staging false flag attacks, bombings, hijackings, even the sinking of a U.S. Navy ship to frame Cuba and justify invasion. To him, these were not betrayals but necessities, tools to rally a nation and counter a Soviet advance. Yet his willingness to endorse such a plan reveals a moral blind spot, a consequence of unchecked power and a military culture that prioritized ends over means. When President Kennedy rejected Northwoods, Lemnitzer's influence began to wane. Later that year, he was reassigned to NATO as Supreme Allied Commander, a prestigious post but one some historians view as a quiet rebuke from Kennedy, a signal that his aggressive stance had crossed a line. Lemnitzer's story is one of duty twisted by fear, a reminder that even the most well-intentioned can lose their way when the stakes feel apocalyptic. Robert McNamara, the technocrat's silence. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, was a study in contrasts, a man of numbers navigating a world of warriors, a former Ford Motor Company executive turned architect of America's defense strategy. At 46, McNamara was known for his analytical rigor, his love of data, and his ability to distill complex problems into actionable plans. Appointed by Kennedy in 1961, he brought a corporate mindset to the Pentagon, a stark departure from the gung-ho ethos of the Joint Chiefs. Yet he was no outsider. His loyalty to Kennedy was unwavering, even as he faced pressure from military leaders like Lemnitzer and LeMay, who saw his caution as weakness. McNamara's role in Operation Northwoods is shrouded in ambiguity, a reflection of his position as a man caught between worlds. When the Joint Chiefs presented the Northwoods Memorandum, McNamara forwarded it to Kennedy without public endorsement, his silence a telling indicator of the tension between duty and conscience. What did McNamara think of the plan? The historical record offers no clear answer, but his later reflections on Vietnam, where he expressed regret for escalating a war based on flawed assumptions, suggest he may have harbored doubts about Northwood's aggressive tactics. In 1962, however, he was a man under siege, balancing Kennedy's directive to avoid reckless escalation with the military's clamor for action. His decision to pass the memorandum to Kennedy without comment may have been a calculated move, allowing the president to make the final call while shielding himself from the fallout. McNamara's story is one of restraint, of a technocrat navigating a landscape of hawks and doves, his silence a pivot point in a plan that could have reshaped history. His role underscores the complexity of power, where inaction can be as significant as action, and loyalty can mask inner conflict. John F. Kennedy, the moral linchpin. At the heart of the Northwoods story stands President John F. Kennedy, the one figure with the power to halt the plan in its tracks. At 44, Kennedy was a leader under siege, navigating a perfect storm of domestic pressures, military hawks, and a public anxious about communism's spread. Elected in 1960 on a platform of hope and progress, he embodied a new vision of America, youthful, charismatic, and forward-looking. Yet his presidency was tested by crises, none more humiliating than the Bay of Pigs, which had exposed the limits of covert operations and deepened his distrust of his advisors. When the Northwoods Memorandum reached his desk, Kennedy faced a defining moment. The plan's audacity, staging attacks on American soil, sacrificing civilians to provoke war, was an affront to the values he championed. Kennedy's rejection of Operation Northwoods was swift and unequivocal, a decision that historians attribute to both moral and practical considerations. As a president who had campaigned on unity and progress, he could not stomach a plan that treated American lives as expendable, a betrayal of the trust between government and citizen. His experience with the Bay of Pigs, where CIA assurances had led to disaster, likely made him wary of schemes reliant on deception. The Cuban Missile Crisis, looming just months away, may have also weighed on him, a reminder that escalation could spiral into global catastrophe. Kennedy's refusal was more than a policy choice. It was a moral stand, a rejection of a military culture that saw manipulation as a legitimate tool. Some speculate that this decision deepened the rift with his military advisors, fueling tensions that conspiracy theorists later linked to his assassination in 1963. Though such claims lack definitive evidence, Kennedy's humanity, his refusal to sacrifice lives for political gain, stands as the counterpoint to Northwoods' cold pragmatism, a testament to the power of conscience in the face of pressure. The unnamed victims, shadows of sacrifice. Operation Northwoods never came to pass, but its potential victims were real. Ordinary Americans whose lives hung in the balance of a plan they would never know existed. Imagine a mother in Miami, shopping for groceries as a staged bombing shattered her world. Picture a sailor on a U.S. Navy ship, unaware that his vessel could be sunk to mimic a Cuban attack. Envision a Cuban refugee, fleeing Castro's oppression, only to be targeted in a fabricated assault to inflame public outrage. These hypothetical victims, nameless in the memorandum but vivid in their humanity, remind us of the human cost of such schemes. The Joint Chiefs saw them not as individuals but as props. Their deaths a means to an end. A passenger on a doomed flight, a worker in a targeted city, a family mourning a manufactured tragedy. These were the stakes, the collateral damage in a plan that prioritized strategy over lives. Their stories, though unwritten, haunt the narrative, a reminder that power's decisions ripple far beyond the war room. James Bamford, the truth's herald. Decades later, one man ensured that Operation Northwoods would not remain buried. James Bamford, a former naval intelligence officer turned journalist, played a pivotal role in exposing the plan to the public. In his 2001 book Body of Secrets, Bamford drew on the declassified Northwoods documents, released in 1997 by the Assassination Records Review Board, to reveal the full scope of the proposal. He was not a conspiracy theorist chasing shadows. He was a meticulous researcher, driven by a belief that the public deserved the truth. Bamford's work ignited debates about government secrecy, showing how transparency could hold power to account. His role in this story is a beacon of hope, a reminder that even the darkest secrets can be brought to light by those willing to dig for the truth. Together, these characters, Lemnitzer's ambition, McNamara's caution, Kennedy's resolve, the victim's silent stakes, and Bamford's revelations, form the human core of Operation Northwoods. Their stories, woven into the fabric of Secrets Unleashed, challenge us to question the ethics of power, the cost of secrecy, and the courage it takes to stand against betrayal. This is not just history, it's a mirror, reflecting the fragile trust between a nation and its leaders. Operation Northwoods, a chilling proposal to stage false flag attacks on American soil, never progressed beyond the planning stage, but its existence cast a long and troubling shadow over the ideals of trust and accountability in a democracy. President John F. Kennedy's swift rejection of the plan in 1962 was a decisive act, halting a scheme that would have sacrificed innocent lives to justify a war against Cuba. Yet, the mere fact that such a plan was conceived, meticulously outlined, and endorsed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, left an indelible mark on history. It exposed a mindset within the highest echelons of the U.S. military that was willing to prioritize geopolitical strategy over ethical boundaries, revealing a readiness to manipulate and betray the very public they were sworn to protect. For the true crime and history enthusiasts of Secrets Unleashed, this resolution is not just the end of a plot, but a case study in the fragility of trust, the dangers of secrecy, and the enduring power of conscience. Drawing on the character-driven depth of Operation Greylord and the skeptical lens of the SL-1 nuclear disaster, we explore how Northwood's legacy reshaped perceptions of government, fueled debates about power, and continues to challenge our understanding of democracy's moral limits. Kennedy's rejection of Operation Northwoods was a pivotal moment, a stand that underscored his commitment to a vision of America rooted in hope and moral clarity. At 44, navigating a presidency fraught with Cold War tensions, Kennedy faced immense pressure from a military establishment eager for action against Fidel Castro's Cuba. The Joint Chiefs, led by General Lyman Lemnitzer, saw the plan as a necessary evil, a way to rally public support for an invasion by staging attacks that would appear to be Cuban aggression. But Kennedy, scarred by the Bay of Pigs fiasco and wary of escalating tensions with the Soviet Union, saw the proposal for what it was, a betrayal of American values. His decision to halt Northwoods was not just a policy choice, but a moral line in the sand, a refusal to treat citizens as pawns in a geopolitical game. This act of conscience likely deepened the rift between Kennedy and his military advisors, some of whom viewed his caution as weakness. While speculation persists that this tension contributed to darker events, such as theories linking it to his 1963 assassination, no definitive evidence supports such claims. What remains clear is that Kennedy's stand preserved lives and upheld a principle: no cause, however urgent, could justify orchestrating harm against one's own people. Yet the rejection did not erase the mindset that birthed Operation Northwoods. The Joint Chiefs' willingness to propose such tactics, bombings in American cities, hijacking planes, sinking U.S. ships, revealed a troubling readiness to sacrifice ethics for strategic gain. This was not the work of rogue actors, but a collective effort by the nation's top military leaders, men like Lemnitzer and General Curtis LeMay, who believed the threat of communism justified extreme measures. Their plan reflected a Cold War ethos, where fear of Soviet expansion clouded moral judgment, blurring the line between protector and predator. The fact that such a proposal reached the desk of the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, and ultimately Kennedy, underscores how deeply this mindset had taken root. Even though the plan was stopped, its conception left a lingering question. How many other schemes, never declassified, might have been considered in the shadows of power? The declassification of the Northwoods documents in 1997, prompted by the JFK Assassination Records Review Board, brought this dark chapter into the public eye. transforming it from a buried secret into a catalyst for debate. The release, spurred by efforts to shed light on Kennedy's assassination, was a triumph of transparency, largely due to journalist James Bamford's work in Body of Secrets 2001. Bamford's meticulous research exposed the full scope of the plan, from its audacious proposals to its chilling implications. The revelation shocked a public already grappling with distrust in government institutions. The 1990s, marked by events like the Oklahoma City bombing and growing skepticism about official narratives, provided fertile ground for Northwoods to resonate. When the documents came to light, they fueled a wave of speculation, particularly among those already wary of government motives. Conspiracy theorists pointed to Northwoods as evidence of a deep state capable of orchestrating events like the 9/11 attacks to justify military action. While no direct evidence links Northwoods to later events, and such claims remain speculative, the plan's existence lent credence to doubts about the transparency of power. The impact on public trust was profound and enduring. Operation Northwoods became a touchstone for those questioning the integrity of government narratives, a symbol of how far leaders might go to manipulate public perception. On platforms like X, users have cited the plan as proof of a willingness to stage false flag operations. Though these discussions often veer into unverified territory, the broader effect was to highlight the dangers of secrecy in a democracy, where unchecked power can lead to morally bankrupt schemes. Northwoods showed that even in a nation founded on principles of freedom and accountability, the temptation to prioritize strategy over ethics could take hold. It raised haunting questions. What other plans remain hidden in classified archives? How often have leaders considered sacrificing the public's trust for perceived necessity? For a nation built on the consent of the governed, the revelation of Northwoods was a stark reminder of the fragility of that bond. For true crime and history fans, Operation Northwoods is a compelling case study in the intersection of power and ethics, echoing the themes of Operation Greylord and the SL-1 disaster. Greylord, which exposed corruption in Chicago's judicial system, revealed how institutions meant to serve the public could betray it through greed and self-interest. Northwoods, similarly, shows how a military establishment, driven not by personal gain, but by a warped sense of duty, could conceive a plan that violated the public's trust. Like the SL-1 nuclear disaster, which exposed the consequences of hubris and secrecy in America's nuclear program, Northwoods demands that we question official narratives and consider the human cost of ambition. The plan's rejection by Kennedy was a victory for conscience, a moment when one leader's moral clarity prevented a descent into ethical abyss. Yet its very conception serves as a warning, a reminder that trust in institutions is not guaranteed, but must be earned through transparency and accountability. The legacy of Operation Northwoods lies in its challenge to democracy itself. It forces us to confront the tension between security and morality, between the need to protect a nation and the imperative to preserve its values. Kennedy's stand was a bulwark against a dangerous precedent, but the plan's existence underscores the need for vigilance. It reminds us that power, left unchecked, can breed betrayal, and that secrecy, while sometimes necessary, can erode the foundation of trust. For Secrets Unleashed viewers, this story is not just a historical curiosity, but a call to engage with the past, to question the present, and to demand a future where truth prevails over deception. Operation Northwoods never came to pass, but its shadow lingers, urging us to hold those in power accountable, and to remember that the line between protector and predator is thinner than we'd like to believe. As we draw the final curtain on the unsettling saga of Operation Northwoods, we stand at a crossroads, confronted by a question that echoes through the corridors of history. What other secrets lie buried in the archives of power? Here at Secrets Unleashed, our mission is to unearth these truths, to shine a relentless light on the stories that shape our world, revealing the hidden forces that have sculpted the past and continue to influence the present. Operation Northwoods, a 1962 proposal by the U.S. military's Joint Chiefs of Staff to stage false flag attacks on American soil, bombings, hijackings, and orchestrated tragedies designed to frame Cuba and justify war, is not merely a historical footnote. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of trust in a democracy, a chilling testament to how far those in power might go when fear and ambition cloud their judgment. The men who crafted this plan, led by General Lyman Lemnitzer, were not monsters lurking in the shadows. They were patriots, products of a Cold War era that saw communism as an existential threat. They believed, with a cold calculus, that the ends of national security justified the means, even if those means included sacrificing innocent American lives. Yet this dark scheme was stopped by the moral courage of President John F. Kennedy, whose rejection of Northwoods in 1962 stands as a beacon of conscience in a time of crisis. For the true crime and history enthusiasts of Secrets Unleashed, this story, told with the character-driven depth of Operation Greylord and the skeptical lens of the SL-1 nuclear disaster, is a call to reflect, to question, and to act. It challenges us to demand transparency, to hold power accountable, and to reaffirm that no cause, no matter how urgent, can ever justify betraying the people a government is sworn to protect. The resolution of Operation Northwoods offers a complex blend of hope and caution. Kennedy's swift and unequivocal rejection of the plan was a defining moment, a stand that preserved not only lives but the moral integrity of a nation. At 44, navigating a presidency fraught with Cold War tensions, Kennedy faced immense pressure from a military establishment eager to confront Fidel Castro's Cuba head-on. The Joint Chiefs, steeped in a culture that saw deception as a legitimate tool of statecraft, proposed staging attacks, bombings in Miami, the sinking of a Navy ship, the downing of a civilian plane, to incite public outrage and justify an invasion. To them, the loss of American lives was a tragic but necessary price to counter the Soviet threat. Kennedy, however, saw the plan for what it was, a betrayal of the values America claimed to uphold. His experience with the Bay of Pigs invasion, a catastrophic failure in 1961, had already deepened his skepticism of covert operations and the advisors who championed them. His refusal to endorse Northwoods was more than a policy decision. It was a moral line in the sand, a declaration that the trust between a government and its people could not be sacrificed for strategic gain. This act of conscience likely strained his relationship with military leaders like Lemnitzer and General Curtis LeMay, some of whom viewed his caution as a weakness. While conspiracy theories later linked this tension to Kennedy's assassination in 1963, such claims remain speculative, lacking concrete evidence. What is undeniable is that Kennedy's stand prevented a descent into an ethical abyss, preserving a vision of America rooted in hope and humanity. Yet, the mere existence of Operation Northwoods casts a long shadow, a reminder that the mindset behind it was not an anomaly, but a product of its time. The Joint Chiefs' willingness to propose such tactics, detailed in a March 13, 1962 memorandum titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, revealed a troubling readiness to prioritize geopolitics over ethics. These were not rogue actors, but the nation's top military minds, men who believed that the spread of communism justified extreme measures. The plan's audacity, from staging civilian deaths to fabricating Cuban aggression, reflected a Cold War paranoia that blurred the line between protector and predator. Even though Kennedy halted Northwoods, its conception raises a haunting question. How many other plans, never declassified, were considered in the shadows of power? The fact that such a scheme reached the desk of Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, and ultimately Kennedy, underscores how deeply this mindset had taken root. It was a culture where secrecy could shield morally bankrupt ideas, where the public's trust was seen as a tool to be manipulated rather than a bond to be honored. The declassification of the Northwoods documents in 1997, prompted by the JFK Assassination Records Review Board, was a pivotal moment, transforming a buried secret into a public reckoning. The release, driven by efforts to shed light on Kennedy's death, was a triumph of transparency, amplified by journalist James Bamford's meticulous work in Body of Secrets, 2001. Bamford, a former naval intelligence officer, brought the plan's chilling details to a wide audience, revealing the full scope of its proposals and their implications. The revelation struck a chord in a world already grappling with distrust in institutions. The 1990s, marked by events like the Oklahoma City bombing and growing skepticism about government narratives, provided fertile ground for Northwoods to resonate. When the documents came to light, they fueled a wave of speculation, particularly among those already wary of official accounts. On platforms like X, Northwoods became a touchstone for those questioning government motives, with some drawing parallels to modern events like the 9/11 attacks, though no direct evidence supports such connections. These discussions, while often speculative, reflect a broader erosion of trust, a sense that if a government could conceive of Northwoods in 1962, what might it be capable of today? The impact of Operation Northwoods on public trust cannot be overstated. Its exposure highlighted the dangers of secrecy in a democracy, where unchecked power can lead to schemes that undermine the very principles a nation stands for. For true crime and history fans, Northwoods is a compelling parallel to Operation Greylord, the 1980s FBI sting that exposed corruption in Chicago's judicial system. Like Greylord, Northwoods reveals how institutions meant to serve the public can betray it, not through greed, but through a warped sense of duty. Similarly, it echoes the SL-1 nuclear disaster of 1961, which laid bare the consequences of hubris and secrecy in America's nuclear program. Northwoods demands that we question official narratives, probe the motives of those in power, and consider the human cost of their decisions. The plan's rejection by Kennedy was a victory for conscience, a moment when one leader's moral clarity prevented a catastrophic betrayal. Yet its very conception serves as a warning, a reminder that trust in institutions is not automatic, but must be earned through transparency and accountability. This is where Secrets Unleashed comes in, not just to tell stories, but to ignite a movement. Our weekly dives into history's shadows are more than entertainment. They're a call to engage with the past, to challenge the present, and to shape a future where truth prevails. Operation Northwoods is a stark reminder that power, when cloaked in secrecy, can breed betrayal. It challenges us to ask, what other secrets remain hidden? How often have leaders considered sacrificing the public's trust for perceived necessity? And what can we do to ensure that such plans never see the light of day? Kennedy's courage stopped Northwoods, but the mindset behind it lingers. A cautionary tale of what happens when fear overrides ethics. As viewers of Secrets Unleashed, you are part of a community that refuses to accept secrecy as an excuse for betrayal. You are the skeptics, the truth seekers, the guardians of accountability who keep the pressure on those in power. If this story has stirred you, if it's made you question the boundaries of power, the ethics of secrecy, or the cost of blind trust, then we invite you to join us on this journey. Subscribe to Secrets Unleashed on YouTube to ensure you never miss an episode, as we uncover the next hidden truth, the next story that power tried to bury. Share this episode with friends, family, or anyone who needs to know about Operation Northwoods, because these stories gain strength when they're shared. Leave a comment below. Tell us what you think about this plan, what other secrets you want us to explore, or how this story has changed your view of history. Your voice is powerful, and together, we can amplify the call for transparency. Visit our website at secretsunleashed.com for exclusive content, from deeper dives into the Northwoods documents to insights into other Cold War conspiracies. Support our mission through memberships or donations, and help us keep the truth alive. As we close this chapter, let's carry forward the lessons of Operation Northwoods. That democracy thrives on openness, that power must be held accountable, and that no cause justifies sacrificing the innocent. Kennedy's stand was a bulwark against a dangerous precedent, but the plan's existence reminds us that vigilance is the price of freedom. Join us next week on Secrets Unleashed for another journey into the unknown, where we'll peel back the layers of history to reveal the stories that matter. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop seeking the truth. Together, we can ensure that the shadows of the past illuminate the path to a more accountable future.